During a meeting at NASA's headquarters yesterday, a retired astronaut who works for NASA or who had worked for NASA for 20 years made a statement that might disappoint some. Quote, "There was never any formal or informal discussions at all about UAPs or UFOs or anyone reporting anything that would suggest something from beyond our planet." The Atlantic reported that, and this came after the public asked NASA during the meeting, "What is NASA hiding? And where are you hiding it? How much has been shared publicly? Has NASA ever cut the live NASA TV feed away from something? Has NASA released all UAP evidence that it's ever received? What are the science overlords hiding?" According to The Atlantic, NASA has learned that talking about UFOs can be a nasty business.
Here's what NASA cosmologist David Spergel had to say about life beyond Earth.
We haven't found life beyond Earth yet, right? I mean, let's be clear about this. We haven't found it yet, but we're looking.
In a new piece, Frank B. Baird, Junior Professor of Science at Harvard University, Dr. Avi Loeb, makes the case that we must be aware of what's going on around us. Here to weigh in is Dr. Loeb himself. Dr. Loeb, thank you so much for joining us on Rising.
Thanks for having me.
So what's the skinny on this recent NASA explanation, or from this former NASA worker? Do we feel like NASA is hiding anything about UFOs, or are they being as forthcoming as they possibly can be in regards to how sensitive this UFO situation is?
Well, the NASA study focused on unclassified data, and frankly, if there is any interesting data, it must be classified. And there is another organization, AARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, that was established by Congress under the Department of Defense, and it has access to the classified data, which should be more intriguing. But, you know, the sky is not classified, and if there is anything unusual out there, we better build new observatories that study the sky systematically, the way astronomers do, rather than rely on anecdotal reports that by chance happen to see something they didn't expect. So my point is, rather than obsess with the past, where we have blurry images, eyewitness testimonies, data that we cannot access because it's classified, let's just look at the sky and figure out if there is anything unusual. And that's the approach that I'm taking with the Galileo project at Harvard University. We have a functioning observatory that is monitoring the sky 24/7 with infrared, optical, radio, and audio sensors. And we are planning to make copies of this observatory. Already we have donors that approached me over the past week to make 5 copies of this observatory.
This makes me think of just how important it is to democratize information that's of public interest. I would say this is absolutely information of public interest, and there's consequences to having so much of this data classified. Would you rather the data that NASA has be available to be used by all scientists? Is there a process for getting access to that data as a researcher?
We will make the data open to the public and other scientists. Whatever we collect will be transparent, available. The analysis will be following the scientific method. We have full control over our instruments. We calibrate them. So everything will be open. The government is not an open organization. It's not a scientific organization. They are focused primarily on national security matters. And it makes sense for them to hide data because they don't want to expose the capabilities of the sensors being used to adversaries. So for national security purposes, obviously we want to know if there are any spy balloons. And as you know, a few months ago, 4 such objects were shut down by the US government. As far as I'm concerned, as a scientist, I'm not interested in any human-made object. So if the government shoots down balloons, that's good news because it reduces the clutter in the sky and the noise from human-made objects. I want to figure out if there is anything extraterrestrial. And in fact, I was driven to this subject by the discovery of the first objects from outside the solar system over the past decade. The first one was discovered in 2014. It was a meteor that exploded over the Pacific Ocean. And next month, I'm going on an expedition to retrieve the relics from this meteor to figure out if it was a spacecraft or a rock. It was tougher than all the other meteors that we ever observed from the solar system. And then there was another object called Oumuamua, which looked really weird. It was flat, pushed away from the sun without any cometary tail. It was not a comet. We don't know what it was. So that intrigues me. And I think we should be open-minded to the possibility that there are probes near Earth that could have arrived to us and were sent billions of years ago from other civilizations that preceded us.
Dr. Loeb, I find myself very befuddled by the idea that our government and our national security intelligence community spotted this Chinese spy balloon while it was still over the Pacific Ocean before it had entered U.S. airspace, but they also admit that there have been craft flying above the continental U.S. that they don't know what it is. Is that something that they're just telling us so that we kind of don't investigate further, or do they really not know? I mean, I find that concept quite scary.
Well, in 2022, the Director of National Intelligence delivered a report to Congress and said that roughly half of the unidentified anomalous objects are probably balloons, which makes sense. And then there are some objects, maybe a few percent of the objects that are unidentified, which are unclear. And I actually sat at the Washington National Cathedral next to Avril Haines, the Director of National Intelligence, a year and a half ago, and I asked her, what is your gut feeling? Because she has a bachelor's degree in physics from the University of Chicago. So she speaks my language as a physicist. And I asked her, what do you make of this thing? What is your gut feeling for the small portion of the objects that are not identified? And she said, I don't know. So I believe her. I believe the government doesn't really know because the data is not good enough. And because the government is not a scientific organization. And I think it's the duty of scientists to figure out the nature of these objects. And, we should be agnostic. If they are human-made or natural, so be it. But if they're extraterrestrial, it would change the future of humanity.
Do you think that because there's the national security element to a lot of what your work pertains to, right? If you were to find something that was of interest, that could be evidence of extraterrestrials, is there a world where the government steps in because it is a national security threat? Does that complicate your work?
Not at all, because if any probe came from far away, they don't care about national borders. It's not a national security matter. It's information that should be shared with all humans. That's the nature of science. Science is about knowledge that should be shared by all humans. It's not the privy of the US president, President Biden, to be the first to know about the existence of a smarter kid on our cosmic block. It should be information that is shared with everyone, just like the fact that most of the ordinary matter in the universe is hydrogen. That is not information of national security importance, and I see it as scientific knowledge. And of course, it will change our perspective about our place in the universe, our aspirations for space. It will make us less arrogant, because as of now, a lot of people believe that we are privileged, that we are the smartest who ever lived. By the way, the fact that we are developing GPT-5 now, that may be smarter than humans, implies that soon enough, we will not be the smartest, even on Earth.
Is there a difficulty in finding funding for this kind of research, given the perception from many that this is conspiratorial in nature?
It's not conspiratorial. I'm emphasizing the fact that it's a scientific project. And in fact, I wrote a book called Extraterrestrial that was published in January 2021. And soon afterwards, I didn't do any fundraising. I received millions of dollars that established the foundation for the Galileo project that I described. And as of now, for the expedition that I will be leading to the Pacific Ocean to look at the remnants of the first interstellar meteor, I just said we need funding for this expedition. It's $1.5 million. And a few months later, I had a Zoom call with a donor out of the blue that came forward and said, here is the money. So I think people are inspired by the vision. 2/3 of Americans believe in extraterrestrial intelligence. That's more than the fraction that believe in God. So you look around and you see churches funded by a lot of religious people. So, I think this is a scientific mission that could receive a lot of funding, and we don't need to beg for that. I'm not doing any fundraising. People just come forward and offer me the funds to conduct this scientific research. The problem is, in the past, scientists were shying away from it, so there wasn't an opportunity for those people to support such research.
So, Dr. Loeb, you gained some notoriety for your work with the discovery of Oumuamua, if I'm saying that correctly. This
Yes.
was an object spotted in Hawaii a few years ago. The scientific community was pretty closed off to your work on this matter. Has the community opened up at all and embraced your work or become more open to the exploration of aliens generally?
Well, 2 years ago, I established the Galileo Project, and a couple of days ago, NASA had a public meeting in which they basically reiterated the principles of the Galileo Project, which is to collect data scientifically. That's in a way a very significant public declaration by NASA that what we are doing is something they embrace. And Oscar Wilde said that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And I'm very pleased of that. But at the same time, of course, there is a lot of pushback. And for example, with respect to Oumuamua, this object that looked anomalous, that exhibited a push away from the sun without any evaporation, no rocket effect, that I suggested is being pushed by reflection of sunlight. Even a month ago, there was still 6 years after the discovery, there was a paper in Nature magazine, which is a very prestigious journal, trying to explain it. And I showed that they made a mistake in the calculation. And so people keep trying to explain it as a natural object. And that shows that at least some astronomers are really keen on shoving it under the rug and saying, nothing new, let's move on. Everything in the sky is rocks. And to me, that reminds me of the approach of a cave dweller that finds a cell phone and would argue, the cell phone is just a shiny rock. The hope is, of course, that the cave dweller has kids, and the kids would say, wait a minute, let me look at this, and would press a button and realize that it's not a rock. So I'm trying to be that kid.
Dr. Avi Loeb, thank you so much for helping us to break down these latest developments in the case of extraterrestrials. We will be right back with more Rising.
Thanks for having me.